As work in Asia became limited to farming and the demand for labor increased in America, many hopeful Asians immigrated to the United States. In the 1880s, Japanese immigrants began to arrive as they saw America as a land of opportunity. Most of these immigrants were young men who arrived on the West Coast to make money and move back to their homeland of Japan. The majority of these Issei, or first-generation Japanese immigrants, did not achieve their goal and remained in the United States. The Japanese worked on the railroads and seasonally in agriculture. Westerners felt envy over economic stress and distrust over cultural separateness. Racism arose towards the Japanese as Americans believed they were taking jobs away from them. The fierce hatred was only the beginning.
For a while, the Japanese Americans were classified as enemy aliens, even though they're citizens born here. And that was very unjust.
Despite the oppression, Japanese Americans became established workers. Japanese families grew, and Issei, or second-generation Japanese, were born in the U.S. By the 1930s, there were thriving Japanese communities in the West Coast states of Washington, Oregon, and California. Following the outbreak of World War II, the American government and military saw Nikkei, or anyone living in the U.S. of Japanese descent, as a potential security risk. The Japanese Empire was clashing with China and Russia and seizing Asian territories. In 1940, the Japanese Empire joined the Axis powers. The U.S. became apprehensive about Japan and began to question the loyalty of the Japanese in America. It was thought that Nikkei on the West Coast had an ideal location for communicating with the enemy. Rumors floated of sabotage by destroying military facilities or espionage by relaying information to the Japanese government. The FBI compiled 1,200 prominent members of the Nikkei community on the A-list, as these people pose the highest security risk. In addition, Nikkei on less offensive lists had their telephone wires tapped and their mail seized. This violated the Fourth Amendment, which states, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, homes, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated." On Sunday, December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii was attacked by Japanese fighter pilots. There were 2,000 casualties, dozens of aircraft destroyed, and 16 ships sunk. After the momentous bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States government violated the constitutional rights of 120,000 Japanese Americans while trying to protect the nation from the threat of sabotage of crucial military areas on the West Coast. In order to ensure that no sabotage crimes could be committed, these Japanese Americans were locked away inside 10 internment camps scattered through the western United States. The result caused President Roosevelt to declare war on Japan. The United States government now had the responsibility to protect their citizens from harm. 24 hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, everyone on the A-list was taken into government custody without telling them why. They were questioned by the FBI and then transferred to Justice Department holding facilities in the central U.S. From a few months to a full year, the detainees were denied contact with their families. This violated the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution that states, "The accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation." Politicians, military officers, the press, and normal U.S. citizens believed that all people of Japanese ancestry were assimilating with their homeland. Western lobbyists representing competing economic interests and nativist groups pressured Congress as well as the President to remove people of Japanese descent from the West Coast. During congressional committee hearings, the Department of Justice raised constitutional and ethical objections, so the U.S. Army carried out the task instead. There is no Japanese problem on the coast. There will be no armed uprising of Japanese. For the most part, the local Japanese are loyal to the U.S., or, at worst, hope that by remaining quiet can avoid concentration camps or irresponsible mobs. We do not believe that there will be at least any more disloyal than any other racial group in the United States with whom we are at war. Curtis B. Munson, State Department Representative. Nevertheless, in February of 1942, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which would displace 120,000 Japanese citizens and non-citizens from their homes. Although the Japanese Americans were not mentioned in the order, the words "any or all persons may be excluded" were used to mask the intended target. Evacuation notices were plastered around the West Coast cities to inform Japanese Americans that they would be interned.
And I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. During that time, my parents, I had two sisters, I'm the only son, who were rounded up simply because they were of Japanese origin. They put into internment camps, first into assembly areas, in racetracks, horse stalls, and tents, and finally into a camp around the spring of 1942, and they ended up in Rower, Arkansas. I was not involved at all in their wrapping up, moving out of their home in Stockton, where they owned a little business, a Japanese bathhouse. My cousin took care of them, and so those are the two.
Most Japanese Americans had less than a week before their removal. Loss of liberty and suspected disloyalty hurt the Japanese Americans the most. The government directed the Federal Reserve Board to dispose of belongings that the internees left behind, which again violated the Fourth Amendment. Without due process of law, all Nikkei were forcibly removed from their homes and sent to internment camps. The interned Japanese could only bring with them what they could carry in a few suitcases. They were forced to sell a lifetime of property for minimal return. The goal of the U.S. government was to get Nikkei as far as possible from the sensitive military areas. The WRA, or War Relocation Authority, was put in charge of the internment process. The interned were first sent to assembly centers before heading to the internment camps. Few of those evacuated had information on where they were going when they arrived at their departure point in March of 1942. In May, the internees were labeled like luggage with numbered ID tags and sent to WRA camps across the nation. By November 1942, all internees had reached their intended camp. The camps had barbed wire, watchtowers, and armed guards. No one could leave without the approval of the WRA. Dust storms, insects, and primitive conditions made life very difficult for the hostage detainees. Barracks were grouped together in blocks of 14 that contained one male and female lavatory and shower, laundry room, ironing facility, mess hall, and recreation hall. Families shared a single bare room and had little privacy. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, and rooms were furnished with canvas cots and pot-bellied stoves. Disease spread as sewage failed and leaked. All mail was censored, and internees were not allowed to write or speak in Japanese. This had once again violated the Fourth Amendment. Head counts took place twice a day, as well as frequent searches for prohibited items such as cameras and radios. Guards were instructed to shoot anyone trying to escape. Residents did their best to form a community by establishing schools and churches. Scouting activities were important for young children. Adults joined art classes and hobby groups and played basketball, baseball, and judo. The mess hall was the social center of camp life. The WRA developed self-government programs within the camp. This was to run camps more effectively and gain support, although it never worked as the administration did not want to let the internees have too much power. In early 1942, Congress deemed all persons of Japanese descent as forced to or aliens not subject to military service. After intense lobbying by the Japanese American Citizens League, Roosevelt instructed the WRA to allow Nikkei who were citizens to enlist. Many Nikkei volunteered or registered for the draft as they believed they could finally prove their loyalty. Additionally, men such as Dr. Susumu Aito had been drafted before internment began. Most Japanese Americans were placed in the 442nd Regiment, a predominantly Japanese combat team. The most notable battle for the 442nd Regiment was the Battle of the Lost Battalion, which took place in France.
Including the most noseworthy battle that we were in is the rescue of the Lost Battalion in France. Perhaps for our whole record, but particularly for this battle, we were given the Congressional Gold Medal.
Beginning in 1943, the WRA began relocating the internees. Roosevelt wanted to slowly release the Japanese back into their communities. The internees who got used to the camps were fearful of the outside world. By the end of May 1944, all Nikkei had to do was sign a statement saying they were loyal and sign up with a WRA field office near their new home. By summer of 1946, all camps were empty. Internees were given $20 and a train ticket to the place where their internment began. Some were fortunate and had prearranged to have friends or neighbors take care of their homes, while others had their homes burned down, looted, seized, or knocked down. The government had a responsibility to take care of the Japanese Americans after they had torn their lives apart, but did little to help. People began to feel sympathy, and bitterness melted away. Despite all government concerns and efforts, not a single case of espionage was documented. For many years, various groups or individuals fought for internee compensation, as billions in dollars of property had been lost. The U.S. government violated the Eighth Amendment by inflicting a cruel and unusual punishment on all of those interned. Edward Ennis, a former lawyer for the Justice Department, characterized the program as the worst blow to the civil liberty of our history. The military defended by saying their task was to make sure vital areas were secure from the sabotage and espionage, not to protect from anyone's civil liberties. On June 23, 1983, the CWRIZ concluded that relocation and internment were not justified by military necessity, and the decisions to do so are based on racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. On August 10, 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which offered $20,000 of restitution to surviving internees. In addition, he made a national apology to the Japanese Americans interned. In total, 82,219 individuals received a check. The Japanese internment of World War II is one of the most evident examples in recent history that shows the failure by government to protect the vested rights of their citizens and illustrates the lack of responsibility that can be used by government.
The consciousness of the injustice that was done to us and the way we reacted is alive and seems to be more publicly known than in recent